You ruined everything. I told you not to come here. I didn't do anything. This is your fault, not mine. Give me the information now, or you're finished. Go to hell. I'll never tell you anything.
Part 1. The rope tightened around Tu Tien's wrists as she struggled, her breath coming in sharp, uneven gasps while the wooden chair beneath her scraped loudly across the cracked concrete floor of the abandoned house, the sound echoing through the empty, decaying space like a warning no one was there to hear. Dust floated in the dim light that slipped through broken windows, and somewhere above, a loose metal sheet banged rhythmically in the wind, turning the silence into something far more terrifying. "Stop moving!" his voice snapped. She froze, not because she obeyed him, but because she recognized that voice. Slowly, painfully, she lifted her head, and there he was, standing a few steps away, her past, her mistake, her nightmare that never truly ended, her ex-husband. "You always did this," he said, pacing slowly in front of her, his eyes cold, almost amused. "Running away, pretending like you could just start over." Tu Tien swallowed hard, her voice trembling despite her effort to stay strong. "I already left you," she said. "This is over." He laughed, a low, humorless sound. "Over," he repeated. "You think you get to decide that?" Her heart pounded, because deep down, she knew this wasn't just anger. This was obsession. Miles away, Jack stood frozen beside the half-finished palm hut near the pond, his phone still in his hand, the last call echoing in his mind. No answer. Again, and again, and again. He clenched his jaw. Something wasn't right. Ever since that argument, ever since he walked away, letting his frustration speak louder than his judgment, something inside him hadn't settled. The silence from Tu Tien wasn't the kind that came from anger. It was worse. It was absence. "Tien," he muttered under his breath, already moving. Because this time, his instinct was louder than his pride. Back in the abandoned house, Tu Tien's wrists burned as she tried to loosen the rope, her fingers numb, her shoulders aching from being forced into position for too long. "You don't need to do this," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "Let me go." He stopped walking, turned to her, and in that moment, something dangerous flickered in his eyes. "I gave you everything," he said quietly, "and you left." "You didn't give me anything," she shot back, her fear momentarily replaced by anger. "You controlled me. You hurt me." His expression darkened instantly. "Careful," he warned, but she didn't stop. "Jack is nothing like you," she continued, her voice shaking but determined. "He respects me. Before she could finish, he slammed his hand against the wall beside her head. The loud crack echoed. She flinched, hard. "Don't say his name," he growled. The air turned heavy. Dangerous, because now, this wasn't just about control. It was about rivalry. Jack ran. The dirt path blurred beneath his feet as he moved faster than he had in years, his breath sharp, his mind racing through possibilities, each one worse than the last. He stopped by a villager. "Have you seen Tu Tien?" he asked urgently. The man hesitated, then shook his head. "No, but..." He paused. "I saw someone take a woman toward the old factory road." Jack's heart dropped. "Who?" The man looked uneasy. "I didn't see clearly, but it didn't look friendly." That was enough. Jack didn't wait, didn't question further. He ran again, faster, because now he knew. The abandoned house stood at the edge of the old factory grounds, surrounded by overgrown grass and rusted metal fences that creaked with every push of the wind. It looked like a place forgotten by time, Or maybe a place meant to hide things. Jack slowed as he approached, his breathing controlled now, his body shifting from panic to precision. He scanned the area. Broken window, half-open door, footprints in the dirt. Recent. His jaw tightened. She's here. Inside, Tu Tien's head dropped slightly, exhaustion creeping in as fear slowly drained her strength. She tried to stay awake, tried to think, tried to plan, but every second felt heavier. "You're going to stay," her ex-husband said suddenly, his tone calmer now, which made it even worse. "You're going to remember where you belong." "I don't belong to you," she whispered. He stepped closer. "You do." The door creaked, just slightly, barely noticeable, but enough. Jack moved silently along the wall, every step calculated, every movement controlled, his eyes adjusting to the dim interior as he took in the scene. The chair, the rope, her, and him. Something inside Jack snapped, but he didn't rush in. Not yet, because rushing in could cost her. "Tu Tien," the man said, crouching in front of her, forcing her to look at him. "Say it!" She frowned weakly. "Say what?" "That you made a mistake leaving me." Silence. Then she shook her head. "No." The word was soft, but unbreakable. And that was the moment Jack moved, fast, decisive, explosive. He kicked the door open fully, the loud bang echoing through the house as both of them turned instantly. "Tu Tien!" Her eyes widened. "Jack!" Relief, shock, fear, all at once. Her ex-husband stood up immediately, stepping between them. "You shouldn't have come," he said coldly. Jack didn't stop walking forward. "Let her go." The words weren't loud, but they carried weight. Danger. "This doesn't concern you," the man replied. Jack laughed once, sharp. "It concerns me the moment you touch her." Tension filled the room, thick, unavoidable, because now there was no more hiding, no more distance, no more past. Only confrontation. "Leave," the man said, "before this gets worse." Jack stepped closer, eyes locked, fists tightening. It already has. Behind him, Tu Tien struggled weakly against the rope again, her voice breaking. "Jack, be careful." But neither man stepped back. Neither man looked away. Because this was no longer about words. This was about who she would walk away with. And as the wind howled through the broken windows, Jack took one more step forward. Ready, because this time, he wasn't leaving her behind. The silence shattered the moment Jack threw the first punch. It wasn't hesitation. It wasn't warning. It was instinct. His fist collided hard with the other man's jaw, the impact echoing through the abandoned house as Tu Tien gasped, her body jerking against the ropes, eyes wide with shock and fear. "Jack, stop!" she cried, her voice breaking. But it was too late. The fight had already begun. Right, her ex-husband staggered back for half a second, then straightened, wiping the blood from the corner of his mouth slowly, almost calmly, and then he smiled. A dangerous, unhinged smile. "So you finally showed up," he said, rolling his neck as if warming up. "Good." Jack didn't answer. He stepped forward again, and this time, the other man hit first. The punch landed square against Jack's cheek, snapping his head to the side. The force sent him stumbling back, his shoulder slamming into a broken wooden beam, dust falling around him. But he didn't fall, didn't stop. He turned back immediately, eyes burning. Tu Tien struggled harder now, panic rising in her chest. "Stop it! Both of you, stop!" she screamed, tears streaming down her face. "This isn't helping." But neither of them listened, because this wasn't just a fight. It was everything that had been building. all at once. Jack lunged forward again, grabbing the man by the collar and driving him back against the wall. The wood cracked under the force, the old structure groaning as if it might collapse around them. "You think you can just take her?" Jack growled, his voice raw. "She was mine first," the man shot back, pushing him away violently. Jack's eyes darkened instantly. "She was never yours." That line hit harder than any punch. The other man roared in anger and charged, tackling Jack to the ground. They hit the floor hard, rolling across the dusty concrete, fists flying without rhythm now, wild, desperate, fueled by rage instead of control. Jack took a hit to the ribs, another to the jaw. Pain exploded through his body, but he didn't stop. He couldn't, because every time he blinked, he saw her, tied, terrified, because of him, because he left. That thought alone was enough to push him past the pain. With a sudden surge of strength, Jack twisted his body, reversing their position and slamming the other man down. He drove his fist into his shoulder, then his chest, then his face. Not controlled anymore, not calculated, just fury. "Jack!" Tu Tien cried again, her voice shaking. "Please!" That word, "please," cut through the chaos. For a split second, Jack hesitated, and that was enough. The other man seized the moment, grabbing a broken piece of wood from the ground and swinging it hard. It hit Jack across the side. A sharp crack. Jack fell to one knee instantly, breath knocked out of him, pain shooting through his body. Tu Tien screamed. "No!" The man stood over Jack now, breathing heavily, gripping the wooden plank tightly, his expression twisted. "This is what happens," he said, voice shaking with rage, "when people take what isn't theirs." Jack coughed, blood at the corner of his mouth, one hand pressed to the ground to steady himself. Then, slowly, he looked up and smiled. "You still don't get it," Jack said, his voice low but clear. The man frowned. "What?" Jack pushed himself up, every movement painful, every breath heavy, but he stood. "She chose to leave you," Jack continued, "and she chose me." That truth was unbearable. The man roared again and rushed forward, but this time, Jack was ready. He dodged the swing, stepped in close, and drove his elbow hard into the man's ribs, followed by a punch straight to his face. The impact sent him stumbling backward, losing grip of the wooden plank as it clattered loudly onto the floor. Jack didn't give him time. He moved forward again, fast, precise, controlled this time, one hit, 2, 3, until the man collapsed. Silence fell, heavy, broken only by Jack's breathing. For a moment, he didn't move, didn't trust it, didn't trust that it was over. Then, Tu Tien. Her name came out softer this time, almost afraid. He turned, ran to her, dropped to his knees in front of the chair, his hands shaking slightly as he reached for the rope. I'm here, he whispered, his voice no longer strong, no longer sharp, just human. Her tears fell faster. You came back, she said, her voice trembling. Jack swallowed hard. I shouldn't have left, he said immediately. I was wrong. I was angry, and I let that matter more than you. The rope loosened, fell away. Her hands dropped free. For a second, she didn't move. Then she leaned forward and wrapped her arms around him, tightly, as if letting go would mean losing him again. Jack froze. Then slowly, he held her back, one hand on her back, the other cradling her head gently. I'm sorry, he whispered again, over and over. Not to fix it, but because he meant it. Outside, the wind began to calm. The noise of the broken house faded into the background, because in that moment, nothing else mattered. After a while, Tu Tien pulled back slightly, her hands still gripping his shirt. "Is it over?" she asked softly. Jack glanced behind him, at the man lying unconscious on the floor, then back at her. "For now," he said. Not a lie, but not the full truth either. Because deep down, he knew something. People like that don't stop easily. He helped her stand slowly, supporting her as her legs wobbled from exhaustion. "We need to leave," he said. She nodded. They walked toward the door together, step by step, out of the darkness, into the fading light. But just before they stepped outside, Jack paused. Something didn't feel right. He turned his head slightly, back towards the floor. The man's hand moved, just a little. Jack's eyes narrowed. Not fear, not hesitation, but awareness. The fight might be over, but the story wasn't. As they stepped out into the open air, the sky painted in deep orange and fading blue, Tu Tien leaned slightly into him, her strength not fully returned. Jack tightened his hold, not just to support her, but to keep her close. Because this time, he wasn't going to let anything or anyone take her away again. But somewhere behind them, in the shadow of the broken house, a pair of eyes slowly opened, and the past refused to stay buried.
Hello mọi người, hôm nay mình sẽ trình bày câu chuyện về Toàn, một người đàn ông sống với những ký ức đã mất. Khi anh dần dần xây dựng cuộc sống của mình thông qua những công việc thường nhật giản dị và sự chăm sóc thầm lặng của những người xung quanh. Dưới mắt theo dõi của một bà lão, Toàn đã bắt đầu thấy vững vàng trở lại. Dù câu hỏi về quá khứ vẫn tiếp tục làm anh trăn trở. Trung tâm của sự bối rối ấy là Tử Diễm, một cô gái trẻ tốt bụng và tận tâm, người mà sự ấm áp gần gũi của cô khơi gợi những tia sáng le lói của những ký ức bị lãng quên. Mặc dù anh không thể nhớ mình đã yêu cô ấy như thế nào, nhưng sự hiện diện của cô mang lại cho sự an ủi, hy vọng và khát khao lớn lao, muốn tìm lại cho con người mình trước đây. Qua công việc chung, những cuộc trò chuyện nhẹ nhàng, những khoảnh khắc bình dị tràn đầy ấm áp, Toàn nhận ra rằng sự chữa lành không phải là lúc nào cũng đến từ việc nhớ lại mọi thứ cùng một lúc, mà đến từ việc sống và yêu thương, tin tưởng những người luôn ở bên cạnh anh khi anh thấy lạc lõng nhất.